Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We are so glad to have Dr. Cece Bates and Lauri Yanis here with us to continue our conversation about motivation, the stories that help us persevere, overcome, and be motivated. Do you have a personal story of motivation you could share? Maybe a time you were motivated to do something you didn't initially want to do, Cece?
That's a tough one. I think that when I think about motivation, it's so closely tied to my work that for me, the personal story comes in what I see children accomplish in the work that I do. So, one of the things that I think is, in my role at the university, I have the privilege of going into lots of different classrooms. And so, I've seen different practices, even as a classroom teacher earlier in my career, I, was always focused on motivating children. And, oftentimes in schools, we see extrinsic motivators. So food or points for prizes. And I think the personal story for me is that when I see kids that are intrinsically motivated to read versus motivated by a pizza coupon or a toy that they're going to get from a store at school because they have a certain number of points, that's where the rubber hits the road for me. Because what I know then is that they are going to be a lifelong reader. They're not reading because they think there's something in it other than the pleasure of what is inside that book. Whether it's taking them to a far off place or learning about frogs, that's what I want to see children motivated by. I think there's so much that's tied up in rewarding kids for reading. And I'm not saying that there's never a place for that, but when we see children that are intrinsically motivated to read, they are going to choose to read, they're going to read more, and they're going to become better readers, more so than the children that are only reading because there's something extrinsic involved. Because when that extrinsic motivator is pulled, sometimes the intrinsic motivation hasn't developed.
I so wish you had been my child's first grade teacher. But I won't go down that path right here on the podcast. Lauri.
So I'm going to go in a completely different direction, and I'm going to take you at your word and tell you a personal story of motivation. So I mentioned that I'm a walker. And when I say walk, I mean walk. Almost 20 years ago, I decided to go participate in the 3-day walk for breast cancer. This is 60 miles of walking in 3 days, and you sleep in a tent each night. So you walk 20 miles, you sleep in a tent, you walk 20 miles, you sleep in a tent, you walk 20 miles, and you celebrate like heck when you're done. It's a fundraiser, and it's meant a great deal to me. I've been participating every year except for COVID year since 2001. But I'm going to talk about my very first walk. I was very committed. I was very motivated. The motivation came from a lot of different places, but it came in large part from being very involved in the caretaking of a dear friend who was going through treatment for breast cancer, and who had lost her husband less than a year before she was diagnosed. So I was really motivated to support her, to honor her, to be there for her. And I trained really hard. I followed all the rules. They give you this whole little chart. You follow, you train, you walk this much, and you get out there. And I walked the first day. And it's a whole nother story about why, but I blew out my knee the first day. By the end of the day, my knee was swollen, even though I had trained really, really well. And I woke up the next day and I said, well, this is what I'm here for. And people donated, and so I found it in me Again, I think we're still stuck on my intrinsic motivation here was very internal, very thinking about it. Called Mare, my friend, I called her that night from my tent, saying, oh yeah, it was a little rough. My knee hurts a little bit. I mean, I was in the medical tent with ice on my knee and, and I got up the next day and I said, well, I'm going to do this again. And I had to find an extrinsic motivation. And for me, it's usually a mantra of some sort or a metaphor. It has to be one or the other. That's what I'm going to find. And I started talking about her to people. I started thinking about her. I started saying, I was holding this woman's, what she had left of hair, I was holding out of her way while she was throwing up. And this is just a walk. Like, I just have to walk. It's all it is. It's just a walk. And that phrase, it's just a walk, belongs to my whole family now. It is its own motivator, because no matter what you're trying to accomplish, probably there's something else that you don't want to do even more, or that someone else doesn't want to do even more. So I initially wanted to do it, but then I didn't want to do it. But then I made myself do it. And then I was excited that I had done it. And each one of those are its own, both intrinsic and extrinsic, over and over again. Again, it's very different, but also the same as what you were talking about, Cece, with, what's in us that makes us want to do this, what's outside us that makes us want to do it, and which is going to be stronger. And I think that, the question you asked in part one, Holland, about is motivation innate or is it learned? Is it developed? And that's not an easy question to answer, but is motivation intrinsic or extrinsic? And I think most people have intrinsic motivation has to come first, and then maybe find extrinsic motivation to move it forward. So that was what it was for me to keep moving forward. So,
did you finish day 3?
I sure did.
You left us hanging. I'm just like,
not only did I finish day 3, the building where we finished, the Heinz Auditorium in Boston, has a flight of stairs, and this is a completely different side story. The person I was walking with, who I had met on the walk, who is actually now cooking me dinner, ran up the stairs next to me, like together. We had walked together the third day, and like we kind of looked at each other. I limped the last, 10 miles. And then we kind of looked at the stairs and said, anything you can do, I can do, better. So I did. I ran up the stairs, and I have a beautiful photograph of myself with about 6 packs of ice packed around my knee, signing the paperwork to do it the following year, right there, right on the spot. That was definitely it. The event was very motivating and continues to be. So
inspirational. Thank you. All right. So Cece and then Lauri, feel free to jump in. When we think about the education of children and learning theory, how do we support students through motivation, especially with non-preferred tasks? And I'm going to kind of throw a thought out there, especially when it comes to writing, because right now I'm talking with my own students that I'm tutoring. I'm talking with other teachers, and they're seeing a real discrepancy with reading versus writing, because we know oftentimes writing is a non-preferred task. Now, Holland hasn't given you his 2 cents, but he's a copywriter. He writes for a living. So I know that sometimes writing is just a non-preferred task. So how do we support students, Cece?
I think that's really interesting that you bring up writing, first of all, because oftentimes teachers don't perceive themselves as good writers, and so they shy away from teaching writing, and it just creates this kind of cycle that's easily broken when we have children, write. It can all be tied back to the ways in which we interact with our students. So, Amy, I'm going to see, I think this was the year that I had you, although I've read this book with other, classes, by Peter Johnston, the book, Opening Minds, and it might've been in Choice Words. I use both of those texts off and on. But he really looks at how teachers use language to develop agency in children. And there was a cartoon in one of his books, and the caption says, it's a dog, and the caption says, "Good dog, never great dog." Do you remember this, Amy? Okay.
I do.
I think that's such an interesting phrase, like good, and you could insert anything, good writer, never great writer. So when we give praise or feedback to children that's not tied to specific behaviors, they're really left to wonder how they ever, achieve if those terms are used in a comparative sense in a classroom where one child's work is good and one's great. So I think the takeaway there, and it can very easily be related to writing, is that when we give feedback, it's specific. And it's specific to behaviors that are contributing to children's problem solving in whatever literacy task or academic task in which they're engaged. So, it may be around composition. It may be around the actual, mechanics of writing. But if that feedback and that praise contributes to their problem solving, they begin to link that effort to their success. And, praise in this way, when tied to a specific action, motivates, it comes back to that intrinsic motivation. It motivates children intrinsically to stick with the task and to persevere. So if they think that something's hard, or they think they're not good at something, the more we can provide specific feedback and praise tied to action that's contributing to their success in that particular task, the more likely they are to stay focused on and persevere in that task beyond that one sitting.
Excellent. Couldn't agree with you more. What do you think, Lauri?
I think Cece has really nailed all of the pieces of it. And, because I don't work closely with students, as we discussed, because I didn't like it, I don't know that I can talk as specifically about it as much as I think that, again, getting back to that lead by example, I think that, helping students understand that it's never about what you can't do, it's about what you can do. And that's how you support them through motivation and on to the next step with whatever, if it's something they don't want to do. I mean, I had a son who didn't want to read, didn't like to read, doesn't like to read. I really resonate with Holland saying he wishes Cece had been, his child's teacher. I have the same feeling every day that I have worked for the owner of the company I work for, who, as you know, Michelle, is a reading recovery teacher leader. And from the minute I started working for her, I said, God, I wish you'd been my kid's teacher. I wish my kid had gone somewhere with reading recovery. I don't know if it would have helped him. I don't know that, but I know that getting someone to do a thing they don't want to do comes from letting them know that it's okay to do it at the level they're good at, not they need to do it. And, at reading levels, writing levels, all of it, that's really, that was for using my son again, who may or may not ever listen to this. So we'll see what he says. When I saw how hard reading was for him and I didn't have the tools to help him read, and I started finding other materials that he would enjoy reading, so I was like, oh, it's not that you can't read, it's that this isn't what you want to read. So I think the motivation is helping someone see what they want to do. So I feel like, there are two things I come back to with motivating kids when I'm thinking about them. One is always making sure that they don't feel like what they can't do gets in their way. And that they don't need to be perfect. That's a motivator, I think, for all of us, like just reminding ourselves that we just need to be good. We don't have to be perfect. It's not perfect.
And I think, Lauri, to kind of dovetail on what you just said, in a educational setting, if we can create environments where children can take risks, they are more likely to try. I mean, it goes back to, the fixed versus growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, the classroom environment may be all about the finished product and it being, like Lauri's saying, perfect. It's got to look exactly like this, or everyone's writing should be the same. Oftentimes we see that play out with story starters, like everyone's going to write on this particular prompt. And I'm not saying kids should never write to a prompt. They're required to do that for testing, oftentimes down the road in middle and high school. But for young children, that notion of being able to take a risk and feel supported in the work that they're doing is huge.
For all of us, not just for children, but for anyone, that is what's at that core, I think, of that idea that really learning that doesn't have to be perfect, and really learning you don't have to know how to do it. You don't know, when you're learning something, I feel like that was the one thing I kept saying to both my students when I tried to teach on my own children, that the reason you don't know how to do it, that's why you're learning, and I don't expect you to already come out and be able to run when you're just trying to figure out how to take your first couple of steps. So, yeah.
So good.
So again, let's move out of the classroom and into the business. Amy and I did an episode on supply chains early part of last year, when we discovered that at the beginning of a global pandemic, what had everyone most distressed wasn't the disease, it was the lack of toilet paper. So we wanted to learn about supply chains. And one of the things our guest told us was, we are all managers in some way. So imagine you're conducting a job interview and you want to better understand the interviewee's work motivations. What questions would you ask, Lauri?
So, that's fun because I do a lot of job interviews. I do have specific questions that I ask, and that are, every time I ask a question or ask someone on my team to have a question included, there's always a reason behind it for me. So this was sort of easy because I write job interview scripts pretty regularly. So the question that I use most often, and this is, a clue to anybody out there looking for a job if they get asked this question, or to think about this question ahead of time. But the question I ask to understand how someone feels about their work and what motivates them in their work is, I look at their resume. I find a job that I think is particularly interesting. Maybe it's interesting because of the similarity to what they're going to do possibly for us. Or I look at it during the interview. I may change my mind about it, but I ask 2 questions about their job. I ask them, tell me one thing that you loved the most about this particular job or the job they're in at that moment. And then when they've gone off and they've waxed eloquent and enjoyed it, I, of course, turn it on its head and say, now tell me one thing that you found the most challenging, or the thing you wanted to do the least, or didn't want to do, or on a daily basis felt you weren't motivated to do. Tell me what that was. And those 2 things, for me, give me a pretty strong picture into what brings someone to the work role on a regular basis, and whether they can, for me, fit into my vision of what I want in a workplace, which is going to be people who have a variety of reasons that they're motivated, so that they're all going to be driven forward in some way, but that they bring something. So those are the 2 questions that I pretty much always ask. And Amy, if you want me to look at my notes and see what you said, I'll be happy to do that.
So I hate to keep coming back to education, but that's what I do. And so we do have a center at Clemson, and we use the word team too. I really feel like we are a team. I definitely want to know, ask questions about collaboration and get a sense of someone's interpersonal skills, because we do really come together. I feel like we have to really, one of the sayings I hear come out of my mouth all the time is, we have bigger fish to fry. So, this going back to this notion of what keeps me up at night, we have children all over the state that we're tasked, to work with. And if we can't come together and work as a team, then we're not going to be able to meet the needs of the children and the teachers that we're responsible to. And so that, I think, is really important, is trying to get a better sense of situations where they've had to collaborate under stress, work together. So examples of that. And then I think the other thing is really sharing what we do and helping the applicants see what it is that we do, because we definitely have people that have worked with us and are working with us at the center that don't have a background in education. But what I'm looking for is someone that has, a moral imperative. I want to hear that come through in the way they relate or interact with me around the way I'm talking about the work that we're doing. And if I can see that there is, or feel this kind of sense of moral imperative, I know that is going to compel them to act in a way, not just because they're getting paid. And that's really, for me, in the field of education, what it comes down to. Like, we don't have a real 9-to-5 job. Our work requires us to do all kinds of crazy things and to travel all over the state of South Carolina and to do things that, it's not just coming in, taking a 1-hour lunch break and going home. And so if the motivation is the salary, well, first of all, in education, there's going to be a problem anyway. But what I'm really looking for is someone that gets what we're about, whether they're, in education or not, and they're going to go above and beyond to make sure that, we're meeting the needs of children and teachers. And to me, that's really like when we talk about, people that are really committed to their work, I feel like that term being called, you're called to your job, is really important. And I really do feel called to my work. And, that's kind of could be an HR nightmare to tease out in an interview. But I definitely want to have conversation with the person that's applying for the position enough so they understand what we're about and the commitment that we're making to our work, and the notion that if you accept a position here, that you are going to be part of a team. And then that moral imperative is going to kick in and really, like I said, compel them to take action in a way that is driven more than the paycheck would drive someone.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so I think you both have really hit a lot of things that talk about motivation and what motivates people. Is it money, appreciation, status, recognition, what it might be? But if you could list one or two things that you have found in your own personal research, in what you have noticed, just one or two things that you've said, yep, that's what I've seen. What do you think?
So I'll go here first, but I'm sure we'll probably tag off of each other. But for me, I think that it's rarely money. People think it is at the surface. And I think that, again, I keep coming back to Holland's exercise story, but it resonated for me, having had that same experience. And at first, the money is what motivated him. The fact that he had put the money down, that motivated you. But in the end, that's not really, you can always rationale your way out of it. And I think that in the workplace, that's definitely something I shy away from. If I feel like money is what motivating someone, you're never going to reach satisfaction there. I think that, my unofficial, always anecdotal research is that people are mostly motivated by feeling like what they're doing matters, either to themselves or other people. Does what I'm doing matter? Can I get up tomorrow and be excited about doing this because it matters, because it drives me forward? And so, how does the employee or the student or the child, how do they feel about what they're doing? And how do they feel while they're doing it? Does what they're doing give them that kind of feedback loop that they need? Whatever feedback loop that is. whether it's that they need to feel excited that they're keeping up with their classmates, is it that they need to feel excited that what they're doing matters in the community, just whatever it is that they need for an internal feedback. So I think, while I do think that showing that from a manager standpoint, showing appreciation and recognizing your workers is important and definitely does motivate people. I think right at the very core of it, it's finding what matters and helping people feel that what they're doing matters.
Love that. How about you, Cece?
I love that too, Lauri. And I'm just thinking about I mentioned that I got into teaching because I wanted to have my summers off so I could go out west and work. And, I think at the time that must have been what motivated me to go back to school and get a master's in early childhood. But nothing, if I didn't like what I was doing, the motivation of going out west in the summer would not have been enough to carry me through 9 months of a job I didn't like. And when you see people in education that don't like the work they're doing, it's uber apparent. And those are the people that you just, you kind of cringe sometimes in the hallway because there's no joy in their work and they're, maybe really harsh with the kids. That really bothered me both when I was working in schools as a classroom teacher, but now when I'm out visiting and I happen to catch someone in the hallway that I don't even know and I hear them talking to their class, I'm like, oh, it's like almost like nails on a chalkboard for me. But, I think what drove me, beyond the time off in the summer was that I developed this genuine interest in how children learn to read and write. And so that I think is true when I think about what motivates people. Like I think about kids again, I know that this is not just about children and about education, but interestingly, if you said, is it money or improved status or recognition? I don't think that, 5 and 6 year olds would put those at the top of their list. But what would be at the top of their list was interest and curiosity. And those were the things that compelled me in my work when I first started teaching and compel me today. The curiosity of, I'm working with this child because even at the university level, that's the greatest thing about my job is I still get to work with children. We have a clinic setting and, I'll have a child and I can't figure out what to do. It's that curiosity that motivates me, to reach out to a colleague, to have another set of eyes on the child, to really engage in that kind of reflective thinking about how to problem solve next instructional steps for this child. And, that's also speaks to challenge. I think challenge is another, identified in the research as a motivator. So when we think about creating challenge, or we think about the reverse of that, and we think about kids who aren't challenged, and oftentimes they're bored or disinterested or unmotivated. So that for me, it's interest, it's curiosity, it's challenge. And those are parallel, I think, not only for children, but also for what I think about my own work as an adult. Those are the things that motivate me. It isn't the money, certainly. The appreciation. I mean, I think educators are now receiving more appreciation than ever before, and it's a fabulous thing. For the first time, parents, I think, really recognize that teaching isn't just because I couldn't do something else. And, because of the pandemic and because, of the virtual nature of schooling, I think that there is more a sense of appreciation that may be tied to educators' work than ever before. But beyond those things that we may say, money, appreciation, status, or recognition, I think it comes down to interest, curiosity, and challenge, which are all C words. So the 3 C's.
Very good. Well said. Cece, well done.
Okay, last question. What's a metaphor to help us understand motivation? Who wants to go first?
Well, Cece just had to talk a lot, so I'll go and get it done. So I feel like we've talked about a lot of them, but I'm going to bring another one in, which I'm going to talk about the paddling that I do now, which is not rowing, but it's kayaking. And so if you sit in the boat goes nowhere. And if you want to do something, you pick up the paddle and you can use it. You can use the tool you have to paddle as much or as little as you need based on what you do. And then there's, we can go all kinds of places with it. You can paddle in little circles because you're moving too hard on one side, but you have to kind of have that curiosity about what's around the corner. And you have to have that feeling that what you're doing matters, whether it's that you're in the boat because you want to exercise, or you're in the boat because you love being in the water, or you're in the boat because you want to go see if the beaver has built a new beaver dam. But you have to be motivated by something that matters to you to move forward. So that's one that I use. I feel like I use them a lot. I have a lot of, I could go on and on, but I'm gonna leave it with that one for now. And
awesome. Love it.
I don't know so much about a metaphor, but how about an idiom? I'm going to go back to bigger fish to fry.
Nice.
I think for me, when I think about the challenges that I faced, like in the workplace, maybe there's tension that's created, or something, some menial task, gets in the way. I think that saying, we've got bigger fish to fry, kind of moves us past some of the things that could pull us down and create the kind of environment that doesn't motivate us. And so I think keeping our eye on the more important, or the most important work that we do, helps us move forward in a way that's not only meaningful, but motivates us in a way that I guess wouldn't happen if we get sidetracked with some of the mundane and menial things that come into play every day.
I love that. I think that I think idioms, we could go on, we could just go back and forth. I could just, you say bigger fish to fry, and then I'll say it's just a walk. And then you can say, we can just go back and forth and get all the way through all of the different ways that we can motivate people. Lead by example, which is more of a figure of speech, but I love bigger fish than fry. I'm going to be using that one. So when I'm out in my kayak, when the lake is closed. So thank you.
Very good. Oh, these are wonderful, Holland.
Yes, indeed. Before we go, if people want to connect with you, ask you questions, learn more by Pioneer Valley Books, how do people connect with you, Lauri?
Probably the best way to reach me is to visit the Pioneer Valley Books website, pioneervalleybooks.com. Go to the About Us and find me. Go ahead and send me a message. I love talking to people about reading. Like I said, I just didn't like being in the classroom, but boy, do I like talking about classrooms and exploring what a classroom is about. So, but even more than that, I really do find the topic of managing and motivating really intrinsically motivating to me. So I love hearing from people. So thank you.
Awesome. Cece, what about you? How can people connect with you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Cece Bates, although I'm not the best because I find sometimes social media interferes with my work productivity. So I kind of go in cycles where I'm, really good, and then I kind of get, where I'm pushing it away. You can.
I just followed you.
Well,
I did.
Sure to follow you back. I also can be reached through the center, and the web address is readingrecovery.clemson.edu.
I'm going to sneak in the social media, which is funny because my social media feed, I am ridiculously addicted to social media personally. I use it a lot. And I will say that both my Twitter feed and my Instagram feed are a little more personal related, but they are very much focused on leading by example and setting your place in the world. And I am at Instagram and Twitter. I am at 60 Mile Girl, the number 60 mile, as in you walk 60 miles, and girl as in I am a female. So at 60 Mile Girl. And you can follow me. I'm pretty prolific out there in the social media lands.
I just did.
Great. I will find you and follow you back. Amy's already been, or the
Afterword has definitely found you, and we follow. Cece, before we leave, talk about your new book a little bit.
Well, I had a book come out this fall. The title of the book's Interactive Writing, Developing Readers Through Writing, and really looks at how we can create readers through writing. So, it looks at negotiating text with children, and through that negotiated text that's often built around a shared experience. So lots of language opportunities there and opportunities for composition. But then the actual creation of the text engages them in all the foundational skills that they need to also enact in text that they're reading. So from anything from basic concepts of print to, decoding text, decoding words, all of that is illustrated first in writing, and then the connections made to what they need to do in text reading. So we also have another book that's coming out at the end of January with Jan Richardson and Marianne McBride. And it's Next Steps Forward in Running Records. And there's a subtitle, and I'm embarrassed to say that I could not even call it up right now, even though...
Hold on, I just placed an order for it. Hold on a second.
We worked through the pandemic on nothing else but writing this book, and you'd think that I would know the title. In fact, when you asked me about the first book, I'm like, what is the title again?
Here's the title of your new book, and it's a great opportunity for me to plug the next thing I was going to say. So it's The Next Step Forward in Running Records, Getting to the Heart of Effective Instruction Through Deeper Qualitative Analysis. I don't know why you couldn't remember that, CC.
We wordsmithed that one for a while too.
It's a great opportunity for me to plug that. I believe by the time this airs is after the webinar, but CC and Jan Richardson and Marianne McBride have agreed to be part of a webinar with Pioneer Valley Books. And you won't be able to, if you're listening to this podcast, you'll have to find the recording of the webinar, but all of the webinars are posted on Pioneer Valley Books. And so there's a webinar out there that CC talks about that book called The Next Step Forward in Running Records. Go ahead. What was that subtitle again, CC?
Digging
wow.
deeper. I like digging deeper. Out of the frying pan into the fire.
That's right.
Yes, as we're talking about more fish to fry. All right. Thank you all so much. Goodness.
Join us again next week, because we'll be talking about the stories behind coffee, how it's grown, how it makes it to our table, and what it is that wakes us up and connects us with the world.
Yes, and as you wait for that next episode, please leave us a review, rate us on Apple Podcasts, and become a subscriber to theafterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversations going. You can find us on Google Podcasts also. And as always, remember, you are welcome at our table.